God is always and completely right and just, and as a God of perfect justice, he will have to equal out justice at the end of time for all the evil that has been done since the beginning. That equalization of justice is called the Great White Throne Judgment, and we will talk about it on this week's episode of Revelation Unveiled on Faith by Reason. Welcome to Faith by Reason. The website behind it all is faithbyreason.net. There you will find hundreds of hours of study material, blogs, podcasts, and video. And we are continuing our study of the book of Revelation, just about to wrap things up. There's only two more events left, the Great White Throne Judgment, which we're going to talk about today, and then heaven itself, or more accurately, the New Jerusalem in eternity. So where are we? So far, we have gone through the 7 letters to 7 churches. We've gone to the 4 horsemen. We went through the tribulation. That's all done. Armageddon is done. The millennium, we ended that in the last episode. So we are at the end. God showed through the millennium, as we talked about last time, that man will never choose God on his own. So it is now perfectly just for God to implement his plan once and for all. But before he does that, there is just one, I was going to say minor, but actually very major piece of housekeeping that needs to be done. And that is the final judgment of evil, of human evil. Spiritual evil was judged at Armageddon. They were done. They were put into the lake of fire, which we will be talking about. Lake of fire, hell, starting in the next episode. So that took care of spiritual evil, except for Satan. He was let out again briefly at the end of the millennium. And he's there now. He's in the lake of fire. So now all that's left is to judge finally the evil that human beings have done throughout history. So why don't we start by just reading the passage in question. Short passages, Revelation chapter 20, 11 through 15. Then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on here and break down the verses. So Revelation chapter 20, starting in verse 11. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. The earth and the heavens fled from its presence, and there was no place for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. The sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and each person was judged according to what they had done, according to their works. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. Anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. Okay, pretty heavy stuff. Short passage, and I think that's really because this is going to happen relatively quickly. God does not like judging. That is his least favorite thing to do. We talked about that during the series on the bowls of wrath. And this is going to go by pretty fast, and then God's going to be done with it, and he's going to get to what he actually wants, which is for us to dwell with him in heaven in the New Jerusalem. But before we break down these verses, I want to do a differentiation between two so-called seats of judgment that we see in the Bible. That is the Great White Throne Judgment and the Judgment Seat of Christ. I want to make it clear, number one, that there will be no believers in Christ at the Great White Throne Judgment. The Great White Throne Judgment is not the quote unquote judgment that Christians, that believers will experience. That is called the Judgment Seat of Christ. And we read about that in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. So calling it the Judgment Seat of Christ is a little, I wouldn't say misleading, but I think it casts a different tone on what that judgment seat actually is, because we think of judgment always in a negative sense. And in the Great White Throne Judgment instance, it actually is. But that word judgment is actually the Greek word bema in the Judgment Seat of Christ. It is the bema seat of Christ. What does that mean? A bema judge is not the same as a judge in a court case. Remember, bema, Greek word, comes from Greek culture, and the Greeks are the ones who invented the Olympic Games. And we've all seen the Olympic Games where you'll have, say, a gymnast or a diver. They'll do their gymnastic routine, or they'll dive off the diving board. And when they do that, there's a bunch of people, a few people actually, sitting in a corner, and they will hold up a score or give a score. If it's really good, they'll get a 9 or a 10. If it was okay, they'll get a 7 or whatever. But that's a bema seat. Those are judges in the sense that they are not sentencing anyone. They're not telling them how badly they did. They're actually giving them a score, giving them a reward. And, the person who does the best gets gold, and the second best silver, and then bronze. So the Bema Seat of Christ is not about condemning us, because if you're a Christian, you're not condemned. Jesus died for your sins, so you're not paying for your sins. What you are being judged on, what you are being evaluated on, is your works on earth. And interestingly, those at the great white throne judgment are also being judged on their works. However, their works will not be good enough to get into heaven. If you're a Christian, your works do not decide whether or not you go to heaven. That's already been decided by you accepting Jesus. Your works decide your reward. And we've seen this in the parables. In Matthew, there's the parable of the talents. There were three. Jesus tells a parable of three men. They were each given a certain amount of talents. One was given 10, one was given 5, the other was given 1. And the ones who got the 10 and the 5 talents, they went out and they used their talents to double it. And in the parable, they were called good and faithful servants, and they were allowed to come into the joy of their master. But the one who had the 1 talent, he buried it. He didn't do anything with what he was given, and he was condemned. So that's the Bema Seat. That's the judgment seat of Christ, where we are evaluated on what we've done for Christ, what we've done with the gifts that he gave us. And if you do well with them, then you'll get a reward. And if you don't do very well, then you won't get a reward. And this is something that it's good to understand, because it answers one of the questions that people have about heaven and whether or not it's just, in the sense that, say, we're saved by the blood of Christ. We are not saved by our works. And so someone who believes in salvation by works, they'll bring up this argument, which I think the Bema Seat of Christ answers. The argument is, let's say you have a person who is born into the church. They are born into a family of Christians. They become a Christian early on, say when they're 9 or 10 years old. And then they spend the rest of their lives, working hard, doing God's will, praying and laying on hands and using their gifts and teaching and evangelizing. But they don't, have necessarily an abundant material life. They're hardworking. They have middle class or lower or poverty, but they're a good person. They do God's will, and in the end, they go to heaven. They don't live a very prosperous life, but they go to heaven because they've done God's will. On the other hand, you have a person who's a bad, horrible human being. They are into, violence. They cheat, they rob, they steal, they exploit people, and they live well because of it. They've amassed wealth by doing terrible things, and they live a life of luxury, and they don't pay for anything they do. Then they get older, they get sick, and they're on their deathbed. And as they're reflecting on their life, they look back, like right before they die, and they say, you know what? I've been a terrible person. I've done horrible things, and I hate that I did this, and I want to be a Christian now. And they bring in a pastor or a priest, and right before they die, they pray the sinner's prayer. Now, both these people go to heaven. But why is it fair that they both go, even though one lived a terrible life and repented at the very end with nothing to lose materially, but the other person lived a good life and did a lot of works for Christ, but they never got much reward in this life? Well, here's the difference. They will both go to heaven, because you don't go to heaven based on your works. You go to heaven based on believing, and they're both believers. However, the person who did the works of God for years and years will have a huge reward when they get to heaven. That reward will be their authority. They will, walk in their authority in the afterlife. However, the person who lived a terrible life and was saved at the very end, they will be in heaven, but they won't have any reward. So that's why it's fair. So there we go. So that's the judgment seat of Christ. The great white throne judgment is this the one you don't want to be in. There will be no Christians here. These will all be people who rejected Christ. These are all people who refused to believe in the God of the Bible. And they will be judged based on their works, which is honestly what they've asked for. You see, everyone lives by their own code of morality. And you have a choice between continuing to live by that code of morality or adopting the code of morality of God, who is always completely right. always and completely right and just. And if you're a Christian, you do that, or you do your best to do that. However, if you don't live by God's morality, then you will live by your own morality, and it's only right that you be judged by it. And unfortunately, your morality will not allow you to dwell in the presence of God. You will have to live, or rather die, by your morality. All right, let's start breaking down the verses. We'll get into more detail on some of this. So, verse 11, then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it. And of course, this is God, Jehovah. He's on a great white throne. We've seen thrones like this before. We've seen them. We see it in Daniel. We saw it at the beginning of, not the beginning, the early parts of Revelation, starting in chapter 4 and 5, where there is where you see God sitting on a throne surrounded by the cherubim, and in the case of Revelation, the 24 elders and other angelic beings, other Elohim. This, as we talked about in that chapter and in the post called the Trial of the Ages, that this isn't a trial that's been ongoing since the beginning, since the fall of man, where all these books are there, and there are things written in these books. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But this is the end of the trial. What is the trial? The trial is time, our time on this earth. From the beginning all the way till now, everyone has been on trial. You are the witness and the defendant in the trial. You are on trial for your life. Your entire life is this trial. And if you are a Christian, then your part in this trial has been paid for. Your fine, as it were, has been taken over by Jesus. Jesus has taken your place in this trial. So you aren't guilty because Jesus wasn't guilty, or Jesus actually took on your guilt. Your guilt has been taken away. However, if you are not a believer, then you are basically left to your own devices, and you will have to pass or fail this trial on your own. And here's a spoiler for you: everyone fails, because the only way to succeed in this trial on your own is to be perfect, to never have committed a sin from the time you were born till the time you die. And no one has done it. No one is capable of it. So this is God sitting on the throne. And moving on, it says, and the earth and the heavens fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. So the material world is gone. Just take a moment to think about that. This is gone after the millennium, after that final rebellion, and that's where we are. This happens immediately after the final rebellion, and fire comes down from heaven and destroys the last of evil humanity. There's no more human beings in the physical mortal sense left on earth, anywhere actually. All mortal flesh is gone. There is no more. There will be no more flesh bodies in like the ones we have right now. They're gone forever. Everyone who exists now, all of evil is gone. All evil people are dead. They're all dead. And when you die, of course, your physical body goes. All you have left is spirit. And of course, if you are a believer, then you have your resurrection body, which is not the same as our flesh. So all flesh is gone. All mortal life is gone. No one will ever die again after the great white throne judgment. What does that mean? That means that everyone standing before the great white throne is a spirit. And heaven and earth are gone. The material world is gone. It's going to be recreated. We'll talk about that when we get to the next chapter. But everything is spirit now. The material realm is gone. Okay, going on to verse 12. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Okay, we just talked about that everyone is going to be a spirit standing before this throne. And here's the thing. If you are an atheist, if you don't believe in God, you're going to believe in him now, because you're going to be standing before him. We all have that obligation. We all have that. It's not optional. And I imagine that's going to be very frightening for people who have lived their lives believing that this wasn't going to happen. I mean, I think that's the main reason people want to be atheists, is because they don't want to be accountable, and they want to live their own lives by their own devices and not be accountable. Well, you will get to live your life by your own devices, but there is accountability because justice exists. Every atheist knows that justice exists, so they acknowledge the existence of God, at least tacitly. They just don't want it to be true. And unfortunately, you don't have that option. So everyone will stand there, but all the dead will stand before the great white throne. And it says the books were opened. What are these books? These books are where everything you've ever done has been recorded. Good and bad, by the way. I want to make it clear. We'll talk about this in a few minutes, but you're judged on all your works, good or bad. And that's what that is all about. Are these actual books? Will God be there reading a book? I tend to think this is more of a euphemism, a symbol. I don't think God needs a physical paper and pen to write everything down, but maybe there is. Who knows? But what will happen is, I think, if you stand before the great white throne judgment, hopefully you don't, but if you are, you're going to see your entire life play before you. You're going to see all the good and bad that you did. All of the evidence against you will be present. So you can't say that, well, God, you missed something. Nope. Everything you do is recorded, and you will see it all if you are at the great white throne judgment and your sins have not been forgiven. All right, let's move on. Oh, and it says another book was opened, which is the book of life. And we're going to talk about that, what the book of life means, in a moment, because that's the important one. They're both important, but the book of life is the one that finally decides the fate of the person standing before God. Continuing, it says, the dead were judged according to what they had done as recorded in the books. As I just said, you're going to be judged based on everything you've done your entire life. Not just the things you did overtly, even the things you thought. When you lost your temper, when you had a lustful thought about someone. It's not just the actions you did, it's everything you thought. Every second of your life, you're going to be judged by it. And it says, and the sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and each person was judged according to what they had done. So the sea giving up the dead that were in it, don't just think of this as, the ocean or waters, people who happen to have died by drowning. Keep in mind that, spiritually speaking, the sea is where evil, said that some particularly evil folks were imprisoned, mostly spiritual. So this could mean the Nephilim, and maybe there were Nephilim being judged here. I'm not sure exactly, but basically there were people who were imprisoned in the sea are here to be judged. And death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them. What does that mean? Well, we know that Hades, which is also known as Sheol in the Old Testament, it means the grave. Before the advent of Jesus, anyone who died went to the grave, to Sheol, to Hades. And there were two compartments. There was the one compartment that was for the evil dead, and they were in torment. And there was an area that was called paradise, or Abraham's bosom, where believers who believed in the promise of Jesus before he actually came would be. We see that in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, where the rich man, he was evil, he died, he went to torment in Hades, whereas Lazarus, who in this parable was a poor man who apparently was still in good standing with God, he went to what was called Abraham's bosom. And at this point, all the good people who were in Hades, they're in the grave, they were resurrected during the millennium. So the only thing there in Hades are the evil dead. And so all of them will be taken out. And what is death in this sense? Here's what's interesting. Death and Hades are talked about here in the first person. They are talked about as personages, not just places. So is Hades a place and death a personage? Are they both a place and a personage? There are areas in the Bible where they are addressed as actual personages, intelligent spiritual entities. I find it very interesting because, death is, we're told that, death is talked to. So death, where's your sting? Grave, where's your victory? So maybe these are places as well as personages, but they are also, all the dead that are in them, they have to give them up to be judged. And it says each was judged according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. Okay, another reason to believe that death and Hades are actual sentient entities somehow. Very interesting stuff. I don't know how that works. Maybe if I figure it out, I'll let you know. But that's what it says, that they are they're thrown into the lake of fire. And the lake of fire is the second death. Okay, let's back up a bit and talk about the judgment in these books. Because there is another, let's say, difficult a difficult aspect that people have with this. One is the one I talked about before, where you have the person who lived a good life but didn't enjoy that, or didn't have like a very prosperous material life, and they go to heaven along with the guy who lived a bad life and then repents at the last minute. And the reason that's fair is because the first person is going to get a ton of reward, and the person who repented at the last minute, he didn't have time to accumulate any reward, so he'll be in heaven without any reward. But you also have a similar situation where you have, think of someone, an archetype of evil, like, Hitler is always the one we think of, who's, the embodiment of evil. Or you can talk about Stalin, Mao. You can talk about people who are, child molesters and sex traffickers and pharmaceutical executives who are just making, tons and tons of money, poisoning people, poisoning the land. Some of the big not just big pharma, big farm executives, like places like Monsanto that does the GMOs in the foods and poisoning rivers and waters and just making people's lives miserable. People who traffic in violence and weapons and sell, and run guns. And again, they're making tons of money. People who own private prisons, which is modern day slavery, and they are fabulously wealthy. They have mansions and yachts and private jets. And they seem to be just living the great life, and they aren't punished for it. Well, they will be. They will be punished. But then and they will be punished here at the great white throne judgment. But then you also have, say, a nice lady who grows up. She is just a nice person, very sweet. But, for whatever reason, she's decided she just doesn't believe in God. She doesn't want to have any part in faith or religion or anything like that. She just thinks that, if she's a good person, then she should go to heaven. She should, if there is a heaven, she should go there, or she should be able to just rely on her good works. But she's a good person. She's just a nice person. So why should she end up in the same hell as Hitler or these other horrible people, just because she decided that she just didn't want to buy into all the religious stuff? How is that fair? Well, it's fair for the same reason as the previous example with the Judgment Seat of Christ. People are going to be punished differently. The Hitlers of the world, the gun runners, the sex traffickers, the people who are poisoning people and causing misery, they are going to have a harsher sentence. There will be a place in hell for them that is much, much worse than, the nice little old lady who just happened to be an atheist. Now, they will both be in hell, but they won't be in hell because of their works. They will be in hell, and we're going to talk about hell more in the next 2 episodes. They will be in hell for one reason and one reason only, because they rejected the invitation to heaven. So I'll get a little ahead of myself and talk about one of the big misnomers about hell that I'll cover in more detail in the next episode. But God does not send anyone to hell. That is a huge misnomer. That's Calvinism. Calvinism is about predetermination, that God predetermined before you were born whether you're going to heaven or hell, which is ridiculous. It's unjust, and it basically denies the existence of God. Because again, if God sentences you to heaven or hell before you've had a chance to do anything, that's unfair. That's unjust. And if God is unjust, then he's not God. So Calvinism denies God. We talked about that in way back in the letter to the church at Sardis a few years ago at this point. So everyone is invited to heaven. No one is sent to hell. You are invited to heaven, and you have the option of saying, I'll take your invitation, Jesus. I appreciate it. You died for my sins. I will take the recompense for my sins. Or you can say, nope, I'm going to do it on my own. I'm going to live by my own morality. And both Hitler and the nice little old lady who's an atheist both made the same choice of saying, I am going to live by my own morality. And maybe my morality might be being a nice, sweet person, or maybe my morality is I'm just going to do what I want to do and get as much money as I can and live the best life I can here, and I don't care who I hurt to do it. Both of those are moral codes. And they both end up in hell because their moral code was not God's moral code, but there will be different levels of punishment. And that's just the way it is. They both made a decision. No one made it for them, and they decided to live by their own morality instead of having Jesus' morality take their place and die for them. They decided they're going to have it on their own, and that's the decision that you have to pay for. It doesn't matter how nice you are. Being nice is not, your good is not good enough. If that's not clear to you already, no matter how good you are, it's not good enough to be in the presence of God, because to be in the presence of God, you have to be perfect. Jesus says it himself in his first sermons. We call it the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5 through 7, where Jesus basically breaks down the will of God. And and the Sermon of the Mount ends with saying, therefore, be ye perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. And Jesus' whole reason for doing this entire sermon is to say that there is no way you can be in the presence of God on your own. The only way to be in the presence of God is to be perfect. You cannot be perfect. And therefore, you will have to have perfection imbued upon you by someone who is perfect. And that was Jesus. And that was he was basically saying the world needs me. That's what Jesus was saying. I can live this perfect life. I will die unjustly, and my life will be given back to me, and I can give it to whomever I choose. And if you let me die for you, my perfection is put upon you. I will take your sin and give you my perfection. That's the exchange. Sounds like a pretty good exchange to me. I've accepted. Hopefully you have too. But if you haven't, then what you're saying is that I will be like God on my own, which is the point of all the dispensations we talked about last time. But you're not perfect. You cannot be in the presence of God. And that's what hell is. If you want to get down to it, we can talk about the fire and the brimstone, and we will in the next couple episodes. But what hell is being outside of the presence of God. And if you choose not to be in the presence of God, then by definition, you're going to be outside of the presence of God. It's binary. There is no middle ground. There is no, well, I'm not going to be with God because I don't like God, but I'm not going to be in hell because I'm a good person. I pay my taxes and I work hard and I take care of my family. I don't want to go to heaven because I don't care about God. I shouldn't go to hell because hell is for bad people and I'm not a bad person. There's no middle ground. There's no place else for you. You're either with God or you're not with God. And if you're not with God, that is what we call hell. And again, we'll define that further in the next episode. Okay, and let's wrap it up with the last verse, verse 15. Anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. So we have that second book. We have two books. We have one book. There'll be two books that will be pertinent to you as if you have the misfortune of being at the Great White Throne Judgment. There will be the book with all of your works, everything you did, and there will be the book of life. So let me just say one more thing. I want to make it clear that back to the little old lady who did good things and was very nice but was an atheist. Yeah, so she will be judged by her sins, which will not be as great as someone who's just been a horrible person her whole life. But she will also get credit for the good things she did. If she was a charitable person, if she gave to others, if she gave of herself, those are good things. Those are good works. It will just make her suffering in hell less. So it's not like everything she did was in vain. If you're a good person, you will get a reward. Not reward. That will be taken into account. It will be unjust of God not to take your good works into account. But again, you will still be separated from him because you chose it. And I just want to make sure that's clear. All right. Then we have the book of life. What is the book of life? The book of life is the book where everyone who accepted Jesus is written. That is the final word on whether or not you will be in the presence of God. If you are written in the book of life. We saw the book of life earlier in Revelation. So even if you're a Christian, there's still two books. You have the book of all your works and you have the book of life. The good news is that in the book of your life, all of your good deeds, all the good things that you do in the name of Christ, those will be what you're judged by at the Bema seat. All the bad things that were in that book, which they're the same book that is used for the people who are going to hell, is the same type of book that's used for people who will be in the presence of God. The only difference is all the bad things you did, all the sins you committed, those are just marked off because Jesus died for every sin you have done and will do. It's been paid for. You're fine if you want to take it back to the court aspect of it. Those fines have been paid. You're only going to be judged on the good that you've done for in the name of Christ, and that's a good thing for us. But when people say, Well, when they've been judged at the great white throne, and they're saying, well, God, I know I did all these terrible things, but I know I did good things too. Can I still get into heaven? God will say, there's only one way in. You have to be in this book of life, and if you don't see your name here, that's it. You have to suffer for your sins. Because again, you hear people say it all the time. I should get into heaven because I'm a good person. I've seen so many interviews with people, kind of interviews on the street with people, or you talk to folks, or you read the people, what people say on message boards and other places on the internet. I've read a bunch of these things on the internet when I go to certain religious sites, and someone will say, well, I don't believe that God would punish me. I'm a good person. I do things right way. Maybe I don't believe in all this Jesus stuff, but if there is a heaven, it would be unfair for me not to go there because I'm a good person. And again, I'll just say this one last time. I know I'm reiterating it, but I think it's important. You're not in heaven or hell because of your works. You are there because you rejected God. That's the reason. That is the only reason. It's not because of how good a person you are. I know some atheists who are nicer people than some Christians that I know. The difference is not how good of a person you are. It's whether or not you have a relationship with God. And I'm going to give this quick story, and then we'll wrap it up because I know we're at half an hour, and I want to keep it close to that. If you were at home, well, let's say you're at home, you're with your family, watching TV or whatever you do before you get ready to go to bed, and you hear a knock on your door. And you go to the door and you open it, and there's a person there, a stranger who you've never seen before. He says to you, hi, how you doing? My name is Bob. I've come to move in with you. I'm going to live with you forever. What do you think? Would you let him in? Of course not. You say, sorry, Bob, you can't live here. And he says, wait. I'm a good person. I've lived a great life. Can I live with you now? And you will say, no, Bob, you can't live with me. But I don't understand, Bob will say. I've just told you that I'm a good person. I've told you that I will contribute to your household. I would just be the best person you could possibly want to hang out with. I'll be a great friend. I'll do all these great things for you. Why can't I live with you? Why wouldn't you let Bob live with you? For one reason and one reason only. You don't know Bob. You've never met Bob. No one's going to live in your house that you don't have a relationship with. Now, let's say similar situation. You're at home, chilling out, knock on your door, and it's one of your relatives, brother, sister, mom, or dad. Maybe they haven't been perfect. Maybe you're not even happy with them at the moment. But they say, hey, you know what? I'm down on my luck. Can I come stay with you? Well, the likelihood is you're going to let them stay with you. Not because of how good or bad they are, but because you have a relationship with them. That is the same thing with God and heaven, the New Jerusalem. You don't dwell in the presence of God because of how good you are. You dwell in his presence because you have a relationship with him. You are part of his family. You are his son or his daughter. That is why you will be with God. And if you are a stranger, he will say, in the words of the Bible, depart from me, I never knew you. It is a sobering parable that Jesus talks about in the Gospels, where he says that in those days, at the end time, and you think he's talking about this great white throne judgment, people will say, did I not do all these things for you? Did I not give to people? Did I not love people? Did I not cast out demons? Which is kind of sobering, means you can cast out demons and not be a Christian. Did we not do all these things, for the sake of good? And Jesus will say, depart from me. I never knew you. Why did he say depart from me? Because he doesn't know you. He didn't know you. You had no relationship with him. And that's what's happening here. And so, and everyone who is not found in the book of life, does not have that relationship with God, they will be cast into the lake of fire. Okay, really sobering stuff. So that's that. That's going to be the end of it. And I don't think it's going to take that long. We're talking, so how many people will be at this great white throne judgment? We're talking everyone who's done evil from the time. Cain, who I assume will be there. Maybe, who knows? Maybe Cain repented. I don't know, but I doubt it because he's never mentioned in the Bible as someone who did that. Abel is mentioned. Cain is not. So everyone from Cain all the way up to The very last person who gets engulfed in the flames at the end of the millennium will all be standing there. So we're talking billions and billions of people. And I would always joke that hell might be waiting if people are going one at a time. You have to wait for billions, 15, 20 billion people to each have their life played before them and each be judged. Imagine your number. It's like you're at a deli and you take a number, and your number 5,425,000,000. Well, now you got to wait for 5,024 people to all be judged before you. That would be hell, just waiting and seeing everybody's life. I'm like, oh my God, how long is it going to take me to get to me? But I don't think it's going to happen that way. God is omnipresent. He doesn't want this to last that long because he does not like doing the judgment. He just wants to get it done with so we can get to the good part. He wants to get to eternity. So I think everyone will simultaneously be judged. Everyone will simultaneously see their life play before them, and they will know what their sentencing is, and then they will be put into the lake of fire and that out of the presence of God, and that will be the end for them, and God will focus on what he wants to focus on, which is dwelling with us in eternity. But before we get to that, we have to talk about the worst aspect of eternity, and that is hell. You are eternal, and that's either great or terrible depending on where you're going to spend that eternity. We are all spirits driving these flesh bodies around, and once these bodies are gone, your spirit is eternal, and you're going to spend eternity someplace, either in the presence of God or outside of the presence of God. And outside of the presence of God is what we call hell. And I'm going to just say up front that hell is always something I've had an issue with. Something that's always bothered me, this idea of eternally being tortured by fire. But recently I've come to some understandings about what hell might actually be that makes it more understandable and honestly makes more sense to me. And we're going to talk about that. So I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just wrap this up. So thank you for listening and watching. I appreciate it. Please be sure to subscribe to Faith by Reason on whatever platform you are watching or listening to this on, be it YouTube or Rumble or hopefully faithbyreason.net. Subscribe there. Give it a like, and we will talk to you next time when we do a series on hell. What is the lake of fire? What does it mean? What do we know about it? What don't we know about it? What do we know about it that's true? And what kind of falsehoods or myths are there around it? And why would God sentence you to burn for eternity? Is that something that you think a loving God would do? And if not, then what is hell? Is it eternal punishment? Is it annihilation? We're going to get into all of that on the next 2 episodes. And until then, have a good one, and I will talk to you soon.